David has worked for the past 19 years on small and large-scale bioenergy projects at the EcoComplex. His activities include identifying, demonstrating, and promoting appropriate renewable energy technologies. Currently, his projects include working on technologies in landfill gas cleanup and utilization, microturbine cogeneration, anaerobic digestion, ethanol production, biodiesel, and biomass pyrolysis. I'm sure you all mentioned those in your presentations today. As part of the environmental business development activities at the EcoComplex, Dave is a member of the New Jersey Business Incubator Network, a board member of the Rutgers Energy Institute, and co-chair of the Clean Energy Alliance, a nationwide network of clean energy incubator facilities. He also directs the activities of a 1-acre hydroponic vegetable and aquaculture greenhouse facility powered by 2 landfill gas-to-energy technologies. He was part of the NJAES team that produced the assessment of biomass energy potential in New Jersey and has written a paper looking at crop-based bioenergy in New Jersey, opportunities for agricultural-based bioenergy in New Jersey, a case study of switchgrass and field corn. Everybody, please provide your undivided attention to David Specca.
David Specca!
Hello everybody, and good afternoon. Okay, thanks for the introduction. I appreciate that. And what I thought I'd do this afternoon, not to take up a lot of your time, but primarily is to show you some of the work that we've been doing at the Rutgers EcoComplex. It's very interesting to see the presentations and the projects that are on display here today, because a lot of them are very much in line with the type of work that we're doing at the EcoComplex as well. So it's very, very interesting to see what your ideas are, and I encourage you to continue to use your imagination, because that certainly will make a big difference. So why don't you bear with me while I go through a few slides and introduce the EcoComplex to you for those who may not have been there. I think some of you may have been. Can I have a show of hands, anyone who's been to the Rutgers EcoComplex? There we go, we've got a few folks that were there, so that's terrific. This is a picture from the top of the landfill. That's the EcoComplex building in the background. That little pipe that you see sticking up in the front there is a part of the gas collection system. We actually have a connection from the landfill gas collection system to the EcoComplex where we use it in our boilers. We also have it available for companies to come in and do research on things like renewable energy and gas cleanup technology. Now this is looking the other direction. We may have a nice building on the one side of the landfill, and the other side is still an active landfill for the county of Burlington. This landfill serves about 400,000 people and brings in about 1,000 tons a day of municipal solid waste. To give you an idea, when you look at the size of your city, there's a lot of municipal solid waste that's going to be generated. Hopefully you've got ideas in there that takes most of the waste and reuses it either by recycling or by production of renewable energy. But it is a very real issue, and even though we've really improved on the way that landfills are managed and our solid waste is managed, there's still a lot of room for improvement, a lot of room for some new ideas. Also at the landfill is the greenhouse that we manage. This is the Bordentown County Research and Demonstration Greenhouse that's operated by Rutgers. And we use this facility as a business incubator that companies that want to get into the greenhouse business can come and rent space. We help them with the horticultural end of things, and then they develop their business and hopefully within 5 to 7 years graduate, build their own facility and continue to operate in New Jersey. This is just one of the units at the greenhouse to produce electricity and heat for the greenhouse. Greenhouses, because of the way they're built, where their skin or their roof is very thin, could use a lot of heat. They could also use a lot of electricity if they're not designed properly. And so we have a lot of demonstrations of the greenhouse to show growers technologies that conserve energy, conserve natural resources as well. And cogeneration is a really good fit because you're making electricity and heat from the same molecule of energy. And so the efficiency is really high in the production of energy from a cogen unit. And so we have that on demonstration. I don't have a picture of our boiler, but we also use it directly to run our boiler and make heat for the greenhouse as well. One of the projects that really I thought was a good fit to bring out and discuss today was one that we call Aquaponics. I saw that term used a lot in the displays, which is really encouraging because I think there's a very good fit between your assignment of producing vegetables and some form of protein for the city and trying to do it as efficiently and sustainably as possible. This demonstration was done for about 5 years. We stopped it a couple years ago, but it is one where we were raising tilapia as well as an assortment of different types of vegetables to see which would perform best given the nutrients that were in the water that was circulating from the fish tanks. And so here's just a couple shots that I have for you. This was the production tanks, and some of the crops that we raised included things like cucumbers and okra, tomatoes, peppers, lettuce, beans. All of them seemed to do pretty well. And so the bottom line of this story is that technically this system seemed to work pretty well. Maybe not so good on the plant side. We didn't get the production levels that we would in a traditional hydroponic greenhouse. The fish did really well. And so even though it worked technically, it wasn't sustainable because it didn't work economically. The fish that we sold, even though it was good quality fish and they grew as quick as they were, the market for fish is fairly cheap for a live fish. And so in that regard, they couldn't earn enough money to keep the system going. And so you need to keep that in mind when you're designing a city of the future, because there's not going to be someone that you can just go to and there's not a money tree in your plan somewhere that you just keep pulling money from. Eventually these systems, these ideas all have to make economic sense as well. And that's why we hope that eventually as we get some additional funding to do some additional work, we can make this system work economically as well as technically. This is just a diagram of how we tried to integrate all the systems together. When you design systems that are sustainable, one of the key components is that you try and close the loop on your systems. So you can see in this diagram the microturbine that was running off the landfill gas. We were recovering waste heat. That waste heat was running a desalinization unit for salt water that we had on site to produce fresh water that we were raising our fish in. When we weren't desalinating seawater, we were running that hot water through the greenhouse and using it to heat the greenhouse for the plant production as well as for the fish. The fish tanks had a series of biofilters to remove solids and convert some of the other components in the water, like ammonia, to nitrate nitrogen into forms that are good for plants. And then we would run that water through the plant troughs. The plants would basically filter the water, clean it up for recirculation back to the fish tanks again. And then during times when we weren't using much in terms of lights or electricity for fans, we were also able to export some of this power to the grid or import it if there was times when we needed more than we were making on site. So we were operating this pretty much sustainably without importing energy from the grid, and it seemed to work pretty well for the most part, although I do admit it requires quite a bit of tweaking and a lot of expertise both on the plant production side as well as fish production. I also wanted to put in a shameless plug. In addition to the work I do at the Rutgers EcoComplex, which is my day job, my family and I also have a vegetable farm, a pick-your-own vegetable farm in Burlington County. And so a lot of the experience and the expertise that I bring to the office comes from having done it the hard way back at the farm. But it is a real nice operation, and if you're ever in Central Jersey, you want to come pick some nice vegetables, I'd be happy to see you. So let's talk about today's topic. And this is a little bit of a wordsmithing and playing around a little bit, if you will. But the sustainable challenge, and I think in a way a lot of what you guys were designing today and through the months that you've been working on this project is a sustainable city. You know, what are you going to do to not have to spend a lot of energy that eventually is going to run out if you're not careful, and at the same time provide a good, healthy environment and one that's a really nice place to live? You want to make it sustainable. And right now there's a lot of interest at a national and a worldwide level on the interactions of food, water, and energy. Those are really three important components as we look forward to 2050 that all have to be managed because they all interact in some way. And so you have your food, energy, and water. And so this acronym that we've come up with, the challenge really is to waste as few of these compounds or as few of these precious resources as you can. So you got to be conservative in the way you manage all those things. And we'll talk a little bit about what some of those specifics might be. Okay, so let's look at how things interact. Let's start with water down here on the bottom. What can we do to produce the same amount of food, if not more, as the population grows, with a limited amount and a fixed amount of water that we have in the world? And so we've got to find technology that can reduce our water use, and a lot of that is through application technology. It's putting it at the roots where the plants can use it, not spraying it overhead where a lot of it evaporates before it gets to the plant. And some of these technologies, including hydroponics, has the ability to grow the same amount of crop with 10 times less water. So that's really important. And it also offers you the ability to recycle it, recirculate it, which is the second item, to try and use the water by recycling, using secondary treated water. That's water that comes from a wastewater treatment plant that may not be cleaned up enough to discharge to the stream, but for plants it works really well because it still has some nutrients in it that the plants can take advantage of. Also, desalinated water is an important component. If we have a fixed amount of fresh water, we need to find some additional fresh water to grow our plants with. Well, if the technology is there and the energy to operate a desal plant, then that's also a possible source of the water that we're going to need. In addition to that, collecting rainwater before it runs into the ocean or before it hits a street and becomes contaminated with things that may accumulate on the road, it would be important to save that for our irrigation of crops as well. Also, selecting crops with a higher tolerance for salt. There's a lot of research going on in this area, both at Rutgers as well as a lot of major universities, to identify that for obvious reasons. Because if you can use water that has a little bit more salt in it and the crop still grows well, there's a lot more water resources you have access to then if that happens. And one of the important things I want to bring out, and again, it's this whole interaction, that more water will give you higher yields in your crop. But you need to do some analysis, life cycle analysis perhaps, some balancing to see what's most sustainable. Do you put more water into the crop in order to get a higher yield? Does that extra water that you use pay off with a lot more crop? I can guarantee you that cactuses and other plants that grow in the desert don't use a lot of water. They're very efficient. But by 2050, we're not going to be able to feed the world on cactus. You need to be able to grow other crops that are much more productive than you would get from cactus. And so there's a lot of crops out there, fortunately, that's the case. But it's something to keep in mind on how to balance our water use with crop production. Okay, so let's switch over to the energy use then. We want to maximize the renewables. And with crop production, there's none that comes anywhere close to the use of sun. It's one of the free resources that we have, and for crop production and photosynthesis, it's something that we need to maximize. And even in your sustainable cities that you're designing, I saw where there was a lot of projects that were looking at potentially using LED lighting or high-rise greenhouse production facilities. They all require some amount of artificial lighting. And even though it's certainly technically feasible, again, we come back to that economical side where the cost of the electricity will be so high and the amount of resources that it draws on will be so high that it may not be feasible to do it on a sustainable level. And so you need to keep that in mind as you design your projects. Try and maximize the use of natural light as much as possible. Also, on the energy side, a reduction of fossil-based fuels is really important, and that would include things like tillage. So you're working your farmland using fossil fuels to do that. Try and find ways to reduce tillage, reduce fertilizer, because a lot of that is based on fossil fuels. The production of nitrogen, as well as the mining of things like phosphorus and potassium, all requires a lot of energy. So anything we can do to use locally produced nutrients or to reduce the amount of nutrients and recycle them as much as possible, all reduces our energy demand on growing a crop. You also have things like irrigation, refrigeration, which is very important for food production. Transportation, that's important too. We have to transport the foods, sometimes for thousands of miles. And I know that's one of the things that our sustainable cities, the city design today, was meant to address, is what do we do to reduce the transportation miles? And that's all very important. I mean, I guess you could design a city that's down in the valley and grow all your produce up on the hills around the city and grow things like watermelons and tomatoes that are around and just roll them down to the city. But that's only going to work for so far. I don't think they'll arrive in very good shape. There's got to be some component of transportation that you have to work into your plans. And of course, lighting we talked about already, the energy used for that. Again, more energy will give you higher crop yields. We could grow a lot of vegetables hydroponically in a greenhouse. We could get yields that are 10 times, 20, even 25 times higher in a greenhouse per acre than it is outside, but it requires a lot of energy. Is that additional input of resources worth it? Or is it worth going somewhere that you can grow 25 acres outdoors in natural sunlight and then spend a little bit of transportation to get it up to your city? Those are important considerations to take in mind. Last but not least is our actual food production. We want food crops that are maximum harvest index. Now the harvest index is the amount of food that's actually taken from the crop and eaten. So in the case of tomatoes, it's the red tomato food. The rest of the plant is usually either just tilt back into the ground, or sometimes in the case of things like field corn, the stalks can actually be harvested and used for bioenergy. But you want to choose crops where you get your maximum harvest index. Also pest resistance, and whether that's disease, insects, even resistance from weeds, those are all important considerations to keep things sustainable and reduce our use of pesticides. A long shelf life is important because you don't want to have a crop that spoils very quickly and end up throwing most of it away. Cold and heat tolerance with global climate change. A lot of the people working in this area say that the crops are either going to be exposed to more colder weather or heat or the variations in between the two. And so these crops need to be able to withstand that without losing their crop yields. Of course, it has to be nutritious and delicious. There's no sense in growing a crop that nobody wants to eat. And so that's important considerations as well. And then recycle what's left, either for the nutrients that are in it by tilling the crop back into the ground once it's harvested, or harvest that crop and use it for some form of energy production, like an anaerobic digester to break the material down and produce methane gas much like a landfill does. Those are all important things to consider in your designs. So in closing, a couple of thoughts that I'd like you to take back with you. And this is agriculture's role in 2050. And before I read this, I actually want to add that 2050, there's no magic to the year 2050. I mean, 2051 is going to be really important too. 2060 is going to be really important. So don't think that everything that we strive for is 2050, although a lot of calculations have been made for that year. But there's a lot of things that for agriculture that produce the food, the feed for animals, the fiber that we wear like cotton and wool, as well as the fuel, meaning biofuels that could potentially come from the farm, from crop residues, as well as energy crops that are grown. We need the imagination and determination of all you guys. And we don't need it in 2040, we need it now. Because there's a lot of development work that needs to go on that takes years through crop breeding and through trial and error to come up with the right answers. And so those are things that, as you consider a career, you might want to consider the future of agriculture and all that it has to offer as a career. And there certainly is a real need for it, given the increasing age of our farmers, and as they start to retire, who's going to take over for them and bring these new ideas to produce the food. And so as fun and challenging as the work was leading up to today's competition, I just want to make sure that you understand at the beginning of the rewards is the competition today, but there's a lot more that lays ahead for those that want to pursue this basic but yet very noble endeavor. So I want to thank you very much for your time. I can take just maybe one or two questions real quickly, but then we'll have to sign up for other activities. Any questions? This is how you get a hold of me if you want, and I look forward to talking to you guys. Thank you very much.